Arachne was the best weaver in the ancient world. Her hands transformed threads into works of art that made kings weep with emotion. But she made a fatal mistake. She challenged a goddess. Athena, the virgin warrior patron of wisdom, accepted the weaving challenge. When Arachne won, creating a tapestry that exposed the sexual scandals of the Olympian gods, Athena did not destroy the work. She did not kill the mortal. She did something far worse. She transformed Arachne into a spider, condemning her and all her descendants to weave forever, persecuted and crushed by humanity for all eternity. This was not an act of justice. It was pure, calculated, and eternal revenge. And this is just one story among thousands that reveal something disturbing. The Greek goddesses, often celebrated as symbols of feminine power, were as cruel, vindictive, and morally ambiguous as their male counterparts. Perhaps even more so. The mythology that no one tells in history classes. When we think of Greek goddesses, romantic images emerge. Athena emerging fully armed from Zeus's head, Aphrodite being born from the sea foam, Artemis running free through the forests. These sanitized narratives omit something crucial. These female deities wielded absolute power with a cruelty that would challenge the worst tyrants in human history. The truth is that Greek mythology never intended to present unidimensionally empowered or purely benevolent figures. The ancient Greeks understood something that our modern era often forgets. Unrestricted power corrupts, regardless of the gender of the person who possesses it. Hera, the queen of Olympus and architect of torment. Hera, wife of Zeus and queen of the gods, is often portrayed as the victim of her husband's constant infidelities. This narrative is true, but incomplete. Hera was not just a betrayed wife. She was a force of calculated destruction, directing her fury not against her unfaithful husband, but against the mortal women he seduced and the illegitimate children resulting from those unions. Consider the case of Leto, pregnant with Zeus's twins, Apollo and Artemis. Hera not only persecuted her, she forbade any solid ground from offering shelter to the pregnant woman. Leto wandered in agony across the world, in labor, until finally giving birth on Delos, a floating island that was technically not solid ground. Imagine, a goddess using her cosmic power to torture a pregnant woman. But Hera's hatred for Hercules, son of Zeus and the mortal Alcmene, reached unprecedented levels of sadism. She sent snakes to kill the baby in his cradle. When that failed, she waited. Years later, when Hercules was a married man with children, Hera inflicted a murderous madness upon him. In his delirium, Hercules killed his own wife and children with his own hands. When he regained his sanity and saw what he had done, his cry of horror echoed throughout Greece. This was not an accident. It was murder by proxy, meticulously planned. Hera destroyed a man's soul by making him destroy everything he loved. The famous 12 labors of Hercules were not tests of heroism. They were penances for murders he committed under the direct influence of the goddess. Aphrodite, love as a weapon of destruction. Aphrodite, goddess of love and beauty, personifies another type of divine danger. Her power did not come from brute force, but from the ability to manipulate human desire, like a puppet master manipulates strings. The story of Hippolytus perfectly illustrates her cruelty. This young prince had dedicated his life to chastity and the worship of Artemis, rejecting Aphrodite. The goddess of love did not tolerate rejection. Her revenge was diabolical in its precision. She made Phaedra, Hippolytus's stepmother, fall madly in love with her stepson. Phaedra, consumed by an impossible and immoral desire, eventually accused Hippolytus of trying to seduce her. Theseus, Hippolytus's father, believed his wife and cursed his own son. Hippolytus died in a horrible accident, dragged by his own terrified horses. Phaedra, devastated by guilt, hanged herself. An entire family destroyed because a young man chose to honor another goddess. Aphrodite showed no remorse. To her, those mortal lives were merely pieces in a game of divine vanity. But perhaps her most disturbing act was the punishment of the Lemnian women. The women of the island of Lemnos did not pay due honors to Aphrodite. The goddess responded by making them all exhale a horrible and unbearable odor. Their husbands, repelled, sought concubines from Thrace. In response, the women of Lemnos, in a single coordinated night of horror, massacred all the men on the island, fathers, husbands, brothers, sons. Aphrodite transformed an entire island into a scene of gender genocide. Artemis, the violent virgin. Artemis, twin sister of Apollo, was the goddess of the hunt, protector of virgins, and guardian of wild animals. Her devotion to chastity was absolute and mortally enforced. When Actaeon, a mortal hunter, accidentally glimpsed Artemis bathing naked in a secluded spring, the goddess accepted no excuses. She transformed him into a stag. His own hunting dogs, not recognizing their master, chased and tore him apart alive. Actaeon died screaming, his human consciousness intact within the body of an animal, while his own canine companions devoured his flesh. The crime, seeing something he shouldn't have seen, by accident. But Artemis reserved her most refined cruelty for those who offended her directly. Niobe, queen of Thebes, made the mistake of boasting she had 14 children, 7 boys, and 7 girls, while Leto, mother of Artemis and Apollo, had only 2. Niobe proclaimed that she was more worthy of worship than the Titaness. The response was systematic and brutal. Apollo killed the 7 sons with his infallible arrows. Artemis killed the 7 daughters, one by one, in front of their mother. Niobe, consumed by suffering beyond human comprehension, was transformed into stone, condemned to weep for all eternity, her tears transformed into springs flowing from a rock, 14 children dead to teach a lesson about humility. Athena, wisdom stained with blood. Let's return to Athena, the goddess of wisdom and military strategy. Zeus's favorite daughter. Her origin story is already disturbing. Zeus, fearing a prophecy that he would be dethroned by his son, swallowed the Titaness Metis when she was pregnant. Athena eventually emerged, fully grown and armed, from Zeus's cracked head. She was, literally, a divinity born from an act of preventative femicide. But the story of Medusa reveals the true face of Athena. Medusa was a priestess in Athena's temple, known for her extraordinary beauty. Poseidon, god of the seas, desired her. In Athena's own temple, Poseidon raped Medusa. The victim of this horrific crime should have received protection from the goddess. Instead, Athena punished Medusa. She transformed her hair into venomous snakes and her face into something so horrifying that anyone who looked at her turned to stone. Medusa was banished, forced to live in isolation, transformed into a monster not by her own actions, but by being a victim of violence. Years later, when Perseus beheaded Medusa, Athena proudly displayed the severed head on her shield, the Aegis. The goddess of wisdom used the trophy of a rape victim as a symbol of her power. This was not justice, it was victim-blaming codified in divine mythology. Demeter, when maternal love destroys civilizations. Demeter, goddess of agriculture and harvest, personifies maternal love taken to a destructive extreme. When Hades abducted her daughter Persephone to the underworld, Demeter's grief was genuine and understandable. Her response, however, was genocidal. Demeter abandoned her divine responsibilities. The earth stopped producing, crops failed, trees withered, famine spread. Countless humans, men, women, children, babies, died of starvation while Demeter refused to allow anything to grow until her daughter was returned. She used all of humanity as a hostage in a family negotiation. Millions of mortal lives were less important than her personal suffering. Zeus eventually brokered a deal. Persephone would spend part of the year with Hades and part with Demeter, creating the seasons. But the precedent was set. A goddess was willing to exterminate the entire human race if it meant solving her personal problem. The madness of Hecate and the boundaries of magic. Hecate, goddess of magic, crossroads and necromancy, operated on the borders between life and death. Her power to grant or deny spells made her a dangerously volatile deity. She taught witchcraft to selected mortals, often desperate women who would use this knowledge in terrible ways. Medea, the most famous sorceress in Greek mythology, received her powers from Hecate. When Jason abandoned Medea for another woman, Medea used her magic to murder Jason's new bride with a poisoned dress that burned the woman's flesh to the bone. Then, in a final act of revenge against her ex-husband, Medea killed her own children, Jason's children. Hecate not only allowed this, she enabled the tragedy by providing the necessary magical knowledge. For a goddess of the crossroads, morality was relative, and human suffering was irrelevant. Eris, chaos personified. Eris, goddess of discord, was so troublesome that the other gods frequently excluded her from their celebrations. When she wasn't invited to the wedding of Peleus and Thetis, Eris decided to take revenge on all of divine society at once. She created a golden apple inscribed with the words, "For the fairest," and threw it into the middle of the wedding feast. Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite immediately claimed the prize. The resulting dispute led to the judgment of Paris, who chose Aphrodite as the winner in exchange for the promise of winning the love of Helen, the most beautiful mortal woman in the world who was married to a Greek king. The abduction, or elopement, of Helen sparked the Trojan War, a 10-year conflict that killed tens of thousands of men, destroyed entire cities, and changed the course of civilization. Legendary heroes like Achilles, Hector, and Ajax died. Cities were burned. Women were enslaved. Children were thrown from the city walls. All because Eris wasn't invited to a party. The chaos that an insulted goddess could unleash knew no bounds. The uncomfortable truth: power without restraint. The pattern emerges with disturbing clarity. The Greek goddesses, when offended, humiliated, or simply thwarted, responded with disproportionate violence. They punished not only the offenders, but entire families, cities, future generations. Their revenges were creative in their cruelty, designed not only to punish, but to traumatize and serve as an example. But there is something even more unsettling. In many cases, the victims were mortal women, punished for being too beautiful, too talented, or simply for being victims of the desires of the male gods. Medusa, Arachne, Niobe, the women Zeus seduced, all suffered terrible punishments, not necessarily for their own crimes, but for existing in a cosmos where they were simultaneously powerless and held accountable. The goddesses, who theoretically could have shown solidarity with mortal women, frequently became their worst enemies. Hera tortured Zeus's lovers instead of confronting her husband. Athena punished Medusa for the rape she suffered. Aphrodite destroyed women who were too beautiful and therefore competition. The mirror and humanity. For centuries, scholars have tried to rationalize these stories. They're just myths, some say. Metaphors for natural forces, others suggest. Products of a patriarchal society projecting misogyny onto its goddesses, modern scholars argue. All these explanations contain fragments of truth, but they miss the central point. The ancient Greeks did not create perfect divinities. They created gods and goddesses who were essentially humans magnified to cosmic proportions, with all the human flaws amplified: vanity, jealousy, cruelty, pride, lust, and an unlimited capacity for revenge. The only difference was power. A jealous human can ruin a relationship. A jealous goddess can ruin civilizations. The Greek goddesses were not role models. They were warnings. The ending. Nobody expected. But here's the twist that transforms this entire narrative. We never overcame it. Look around the modern world. We no longer worship Hera or Athena, but we have built equally ruthless and ego-driven systems of power. Modern leaders, regardless of gender, with enough power demonstrate the same capacity for disproportionate revenge as the ancient Olympian goddesses. History is full of examples. Dictators who exterminate populations for perceived insults, corporations that destroy lives for profit, powerful individuals who ruin careers on a whim. The problem was never specifically about goddesses or gods. It was about unchecked power. The ancient Greeks understood something profound. Any being with absolute power and no accountability will eventually become monstrous, regardless of how it began. Their goddesses weren't evil because they were feminine. They were dangerous because they were all-powerful. Similarly, Zeus wasn't a tyrant because he was masculine, but because no one could stop him. The brutal lesson of Greek mythology isn't that women are cruel, or that men are worse. The lesson is that any being, human or divine, male or female, with unlimited power and no oversight, will eventually wield that power in terrible ways. The Greek goddesses were complex, fascinating, and terrifying not despite their power, but because of it. They loved intensely and hated with equal fervor. They protected their favorites with fierce devotion and destroyed their enemies with sadistic creativity. They were as capable of compassion as of incomprehensible cruelty. In other words, they were exactly like us, only with the ability to transform their worst impulses into cosmic reality. The true dark history of the Greek goddesses isn't about gender. It's a mirror showing what all human beings can become when we remove all restraints on our power. It's an ancient warning that remains urgently relevant. Power corrupts. Absolute power corrupts absolutely, and that corruption recognizes no gender. When Arachne was transformed into a spider, when Medusa was cursed for her own rape, when 14 children were murdered to punish maternal arrogance. These weren't just myths about cruel goddesses. They were prophecies about what any of us can become when we have too much power and too little humanity. The Greeks didn't give us these stories to worship their gods. They gave us these stories as warnings, and we, thousands of years later, still haven't learned the lesson. The Greek goddesses weren't perfect, and that was precisely the point. They were dark mirrors reflecting our own potential for greatness and for horror, an eternal reminder that power without wisdom, strength without compassion, and authority without responsibility inevitably lead to tragedy. It doesn't matter who holds the lightning bolt. The next time you see a marble statue of a Greek goddess in a museum, serene, beautiful, eternally frozen in artistic perfection, remember, behind that impassive stone face lies a story of absolute power, relentless revenge, and the infinite capacity for both creation and destruction. And ask yourself, if you had that power, would you be any different? The honest answer to that question is more terrifying than any ancient myth. And you, what do you think? Did this journey into the dark side of the Greek goddesses surprise you? Which story shocked you the most? The cruel transformation of Arachne, the massacre of Niobe's children, or the injustice against Medusa? Leave your opinion in the comments. I want to know. Do you agree that the problem is absolute power? Or do you think there was something more sinister going on in Greek mythology? If you've made it this far and this story has changed your view of Greek mythology, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Every week I bring fascinating stories that reveal the dark side of history, mythology, and culture that nobody tells you about.